The Texas recruiting scene in 2022 is going to be a straight up knife fight, virtually, of course, but a straight up knife fight. There are so many good players out here. How many? Because you may think, oh, Texas is loaded every year. Well, to varying degrees, that's true. I'm about to drop some numbers on you that are going to blow your mind. It always is. Kind of that's what people say. Anytime you say it's a great year in Texas or a great year in Georgia, it always is. Well, yes, but we're speaking relative to the backdrop of Texas recruiting. So we're not comparing it to what Connecticut has to offer this year. No disrespect. But the rankings update happened Wednesday. So yesterday we had the 2022 cycle, the latest rankings updates. There was a lot of movement, there was a lot of chatter. And so a lot of people quickly looked and said, oh my goodness, what is happening in Texas? I think Chris Hummer, second shout out for Hummer tonight on the show, I think he did a quick hit on what we're looking at, historically speaking, what we're looking at in the state of Texas. So I got some numbers here for you. This is mind blowing. If you follow recruiting or if you don't, these numbers are going to tell the tale for you. There are 35 players in the state of Texas for the 2022 recruiting cycle ranked in the top 247. So that's 14.2% of the overall top 247 being from that state. Now, you may think, okay, that sounds like it may be normal. I have no basis for comparison. It's really high. In fact, that's about the highest it's been in the last decade, any given year. That's not really where the meat is. The true meat can be found in the following two statistics. There are 20 players from the state of Texas in the top 100, one out of every five. Mind blowing. That's crazy. And also, they have 9 of the top 32. Now, why is that important? Well, when the rankings get filled out at 24/7 Sports, we're going to have 32 5-star players. It's used to mirror the NFL draft. Think about that process whatever you want to. I don't really care for the purposes of this show. There are going to be 32 5-star players. 9 out of the top 32 right now are from the state of Texas. So you may think to yourself, okay, but I don't pay attention to this stuff really hardcore year over year. So I don't know how to process that. Here's how to process it. So Texas has 20 players ranked in the top 100. Average would be about 13 to 13 and a half per year. They have 9 guys ranked in the top 32. Average would be about 4. So they're far above and beyond exceeding what really they do normally. But also, when you look at that top 20 number, when you look at that 5-star number, top 32, it's unprecedented. We have not seen a class like this in the state of Texas. So here comes the $1 million question, of course. We all know synonymous with Texas recruiting is going to be the University of Texas. And synonymous with that's going to be the question, what is Steve Sarkisian going to do about this? What are the Texas Longhorns going to do about this? Now, there hasn't been any drought in recruiting out there to begin with. Lack of overall personnel, that was never really the issue at Texas. Maximizing the potential and squeezing every drop of potential out of that roster, yeah, that was a different story. And that's why we have a new head coach at Texas and Steve Sarkisian. But I know a lot of people are going to put that on the headline. That is a very valid question. But my mind does not just go to Texas versus Texas A&M or Texas versus OU or even OU versus A&M, which I would argue is the hottest recruiting battle out in that portion of the country right now. Hopefully the Longhorns, for their sake, can change that. But that's not immediately where my mind goes. I'm looking at Texas versus Alabama. I'm looking at A&M versus Ohio State. Like you got to ask yourself, first and foremost, before you start to divvy up the lion's share of that talent in state, you got to make sure the door is shut. You got to make sure Ryan Day and Nick Saban don't keep feeling totally free and easy coming into your state and taking talent out of it. It's happening every year. And I'm not talking about some guys that are, low to mid 4-star type guys. I'm talking about the best of the best, in many cases, leaving the state of Texas. Now, speaking of Nick Saban, when I think about what Steve Sarkisian has the chance to do here, and I think about what they have the chance and the opportunity that they've inherited to take advantage of in the 2022 cycle, I think back to Saban's first full year at Alabama. His first full recruiting cycle was that 08 class. And he was very fortunate that he took the job when he did, because the state of Alabama was loaded. It was one of the best in-state crops of talent that the Alabama recruiting scene had seen in quite a while. He landed in that first full class that went on to, I think, be the top rated class in the country. And it went on to pave the road for eventual championship teams really 1 year later. How about these names? Julio Jones was in that class. He was a young man out of Foley High School. Robert Lester was a 4-star safety that ended up starting for him out of Foley. Both of those guys came from the same high school. Marcel Darius, ended up being a first round draft pick. Mark Barron ended up being a first round draft pick. Courtney Upshaw was in this class. BJ Scott was a guy that never really panned out, but he was ranked 5 stars in that class. BJ Scott was one of the first dominoes. I was listening to, I think it was Tim Watts and Travis Reier over on the Built by Bama Online podcast. It's a really good one for you Bama fans. But they are doing something right now. They're doing a series where they sort of go back and they just recap all the past recruiting classes. It's a really fun exercise, especially for Alabama folks, for obvious reasons. They were talking about that '08 class and how important that early domino of BJ Scott was, because it was not cool to commit to Alabama at that point. It was far more cool if you go out west to USC or you go play for Urban at Florida. I mean, that's a '70s program. Well, all of a sudden, you got BJ Scott and Julio Jones and Mark Barron and Courtney Upshaw and Marcel Darius. They just start knocking those dominoes down. Well, it was like a floodgate opening, obviously, for Nick Saban. But that class, when they opened against Clemson that fall, so many of those guys were either on the field starting or on the field on special teams. I was there. I was in the building that night. They played them in Atlanta. And there was such a precursor. It was so glaring. It just slapped you in the face of, wow, like a lot of those freshmen, a lot of these 17 and 18-year-olds on the field look better than 3 or 4 year starters. This is changing. It's going to change really quick. And it did change really quick. So outside of Texas, University of Texas A&M is sitting here well positioned. Texas hopes to fit that Bama mold of capitalizing in their first full year as a coaching staff on a great in-state crop of talent. That's the kind of way that you redefine a program. I mean, that's the kind of way a decade from now, if things have worked out for Texas, you're telling the story to, the kids who were too young to remember, in that 2022 cycle. You may not remember this, little junior, but there were so many good players in this state. And this guy and this guy and that guy and that guy, we all got them everywhere from Odessa to Tyler to San Antonio down to Brownsville and everywhere in between. We got those guys and they built a culture, they built a foundation. And here's what's important. We built a foundation for the future of this program on in-state guys, which is the way it should be. It's the way it's always been done here when we've run this program the right way. They got a chance to tell that story at Texas. They got a chance to tell that story at Texas A&M. But I'm telling you right now, Lincoln Riley is drooling all over himself. Ryan Day, Nick Saban drooling all over themselves because they look and they say, I got just as much right to be in here and take these guys as you do. And you know what? They're absolutely right. So Texas recruiting 2022. If you've just been a casual fan of the recruiting game and you're looking to dive in, if you want one storyline to follow that 2022 Texas class. It's going to be really fun this year.